We have been working through universal laws. So we're on part 4. And I think that last week we kind of walked through the law of attraction, the law of the transmutation of energy, and the law of relativity. This week, we're going to look at the law of polarity, the law of rhythm, and the law of gender. Interesting, right? You wouldn't think there were a law of gender, but I love it. So, the law of polarity. Am I saying that right?
Polarity.
Polarity. That's right. I knew that didn't sound right coming out of my mouth. So, everything is on a continuum and has an opposite. We can suppress and transform undesirable thoughts by concentrating on the opposite side of the pole. This is the law of mental vibration. So, thoughts and emotions are part of life, but they're not who we are. It's all in your mind. This law clearly tells us that we have the power. We hold it all. We have all the power over our lives. Now, that is not to say, we have talked about, the law of, where we're given a certain amount of challenges in each lifetime. So that's not saying we aren't going to have challenges. So it's not a choice that you're not ever going to have pain. That's not what we're talking about. Every game, and science says right now, there's a NASA scientist that's saying that there's evidence that we're playing a video game. So that being said, right, it's not saying that we're not going to have challenges, because without challenges, a game is really not very fun to play, right? So we're going to have the challenges. The challenge is to stay connected to our hearts, so that in walking through the challenges, we and everyone else involved is being elevated, right? So it's not like you're walking through challenges and playing, the game to win, at the expense of others. We're playing the game. My vision always is, when I see this active in my meditations, I always see myself rising up with an umbrella that has tons and tons of people rising with me, right? So that's it, right? So as we walk through challenges, it's about getting through it the easiest and fastest way without hurting anyone and without hurting ourselves and without running around in chaos around the edges, because that's kind of what we have a tendency to do, right? Run around the edges. And I always think, wow, we can run around the edges of a fire and get singed on both sides, on every corner for years and years and years, or you can just run right through, get a swift burn and be done, right? So that's kind of how this works, right? So again, we have had this one come up numerous times, but worry is our strongest form of prayer.
I like that.
Yeah, because it gets more airtime. Like, look, you'll tell a fence post your worries, right? Like we will stop and tell everybody our concerns, our problems, our suffering going on in our lives, right? Well, what you need to understand is when you're doing that, not only are you creating this story, you also are filling it with leftovers of everyone else's story that's coagulated in this morphic field, So say you're in the process of divorce, and you utter one sentence of negativity or hate, what rains down on you? As soon as it leaves your lips, the intensity with which you felt that is just magnified, right? Every time, right? So it's very, very powerful to keep those thoughts to yourself. If somebody says, how you're doing, saying better. Zip. If you're going to talk to somebody about your issues, your problems, things you're working through, make sure to choose them very wisely. You want someone who's going to be observant, to leave their stuff on the curb when they're talking to you, so that they're not melding their or impressing their energies upon you, their thoughts, their pains, their sufferings upon you, right? So when you're choosing that person, I find it much like how confession in Catholicism was originally like the original intent. was coming together in that 2 or more space with somebody you really trusted. Now, we know where that went, but somebody that you really trusted to give you solid advice for moving forward, not to wallow, right? There's no wallowing there. They never, played that game, right? So we have the power. This law tells us without a doubt that we have the power to tip these scales with our mind. So for whatever thought comes up, arises from the negative side of the pail, we have the power to push it and even those scales, right? That's why prayer is super important in balancing this, but not the way we've been utilizing it. Not the prayer where we're whining and rambling and, right? I think of God as like the universal internet. So you want to really hone those lines in to counterbalance whatever's showing up in your life, right? You want to really hone that in and just reiterate it. Reiterate it, right? Just one little short sentence. I find our brain loves to read, so it's super powerful also to just like make sticky notes and like wallpaper your environment, with one thing that you're trying to outweigh, right? And just every time you walk into the room, you say it over and over again, right? It's really powerful also, which we've talked a little bit about, the law of vibration, to get some frequency behind that as well. It's often really awesome to chant it. Doesn't matter if you can sing or not, because I can't sing a note, but I'll be out by myself and, get a rhythm and start getting some music behind, whatever your affirmation is that you're trying to work with. Really powerful. It happens really fast. That's also really powerful if you're trying to release. If you can vibrate it out, put some sort of sound behind it, and it doesn't matter, I think a lot of us get caught up in like, oh, I can't sing, blah, blah, blah. It's not about that. It's not about that, because whatever sound comes out of you is the frequency that's necessary to dislodge whatever it is you're trying to move. So it doesn't matter what it sounds like to you, which is cool, right? So if you change your mind, you change your life, guys. It's all in your head. Everything you're experiencing is in your head. It's all in your head. And I just can't reiterate that enough. I just know from personal experience the mire I lived in for 50 years. And it took one day changing my mind. Just changing my outlook on it, and it was just like that, I'd had it come in, like Sally said, that she'd had numerous things that we had been talking about coming in from different avenues, which I love that. The universe is trying to get that on exactly the right frequency for it to click, right? But I forgot where I was going with that. But changing your mind changes everything. I mean, it truly takes like that light bulb moment to go, oh, to where things become very clear and you can see the straight line through. So that's when we're caught in a sequence of problems. That's really the question. What is the straightest line through? The straightest line through is truth, guys. Emotion is nothing but a distraction. Right? Emotion is rarely true, and it's nothing but a distraction. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that when you're clear and you're in a situation and you're having emotion, but there's no residual, right? You're not leaving emotion behind, and you're not standing in old stagnant emotion. Does that make sense? So the law of rhythm. Everything vibrates and moves to certain rhythms. These rhythms establish seasons, cycles, stages of development, and patterns. Each cycle reflects the regularity of God's universe. So, we have to become aware and get in tune with the cycles that our life, our bodies, our relationships, everything is moving through. And there's always a shadow period and a high period, and a shadow period and a high period, right? In the shadow periods, we're usually really learning. And in the high periods, we're integrating. The low periods we're learning, the high periods we're integrating, right? So there's no bad time. There's times of learning and times of integrating, right? Which is a different place for us to look at that. That's a different lens to see life through. And not all cycles are bad. You know, many cycles are necessary for us to grow. You know, and I think a lot of what we see as bad is our greatest opportunities to grow. Right? Our very greatest opportunities to grow. And some cycles run through generations, right? You know, we've got cycles of poverty, we've got cycles of abuse, we've got cycles of money, right? I mean, there are good cycles that run generations too, but we have to notice where they are, right? Because I think that especially these generational cycles, we tend to see as just a given, and we don't feel we can have any effect over them. Right? So, but we can. Believe me, we can. We can stop those cycles of abuse and poverty and, you know, just by making new and different choices. Because like you said, you know, we're entrained to make the same choices. You know, being a psychic, I've always thought, you know, I've always had a little trepidation by telling somebody what I see out there, because all they'd have to do is make one choice different than like their normal pattern of choices, and that is going to shift, right? Just one choice, right? So that's what you guys need to know. Oftentimes I would find, like when I would tell somebody this out there, you know, it gave us an opportunity to diffuse it, right? By making different choices. But then it's not really like giving validation to that out there. But you see where I'm going with that. Like we, you know, so each second we have the possibility of making a completely new choice and changing our trajectory just by changing our mind and changing our thought around how we look at something. And without contrast, would we even see the beauty? You know, that's another piece, is we vie to have this peace and this calm and be in this pond of with no waves and no ripples. But that kind of like being in Alaska, wouldn't it? You know, we get here in in our winter February weather, and we're like, oh, I'll move to Alaska, I'll have that sunshine, and within weeks you're going to be like, I need to go to sleep, I need the dark, I need the contrast of that night, right? So as we're moving through our circumstance, I started to say struggle, but struggle is a choice, right? So as we move through our circumstance, we have to really step back and step into that observer space and say, hey, you know, let's step out of emotion. Let's see this for what it is. And what am I supposed to gain? Show me the straightest line through. Straightest line through. And just like music, you know, life builds and it recedes, like we talked about a while ago. It builds and recedes, right? So we can't judge the recessions, because the recessions is when we're creating. You know, I had a healer tell me one time, she was like, you think that you cycle into depression, or that you're like a bipolar kind of energy. And I was like, yeah, I've always wondered. And she said, stop. You dip down into melancholy to regroup, and you come up and you create. And then you go back in. You know, and usually when I'm down here, I'm very meditative, I read a lot, blah, 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 and then I come up and create, right? Where I used to get down into where, like, what's the matter with me? What's wrong with me? Versus just resting into the cycles that are me, right? They're just me. I love this one because this is really interesting, right? The law of gender. The law of gender manifests in all life as male or female. It is the law that governs what we know as creation. This law decrees that everything in nature is both male and female. Both are required for life to exist. Everything is both male and female. So that need to dominate runs deep, doesn't it? So us as women, as we are, complaining and struggling with the man thing, we were probably man last life, right? We have been back and forth through that trajectory over and over again. So most often, that battle is inside of us, right? Because once we resolve it inside of us, we're not being dominated from the men around us, right? Once we resolve that male, female, up and down that happens inside of us. Does that make sense? Because we just played in this game, a lot of times, I know for myself, I'm sure my last lifetime, I was a trapper, right?
You were what?
A trapper. I'm so attracted to it, and the American Indians and being out in the wilderness by myself and blah, 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 right? So that's been something in this lifetime to actually be with a man and have that relationship, right? That is supposed to be a male and female relationship, right? Because I can show up in the man space really easily. So with our focus on the minutia, we just forgot. We forgot that we're playing this game of many, many rounds, right? And many, many challenges within each round. And there's been so much learning and so much accumulation of knowledge and wisdom through these other lifetimes that a big portion of what we're experiencing today is remembering what you already know. Because we come to this planet caught up in this minutia, right? Because we forgot we're playing this ginormous game, or this ginormous, quote, like NASA says, video game, right? So, in forgetting the overarching big game, we get all caught up in this minutia, and then we forget that we're supposed to be remembering, and gathering everything up for this complete integration, right? Because that's the end goal, is complete integration. That is being able to fit through the eye of the needle. That's not having any warts sticking out, any, hump on our back. No, that's like walking through in our perfect physical and mental form to be able to fit through there, right? So here you are, you're at the mouth of the cave, right? And the light, it's just on the other side, and it's calling, right? It's calling. But it's a scary journey when you think, okay, I'm going to enter that dark cave, right? I'm going to enter that dark cave, because that's, people that have coached with me know, it's like, you go through a period that feels very uncomfortable. It's dark. Because change, good, bad, or indifferent, is uncomfortable. Especially when you're really unearthing this old trap stuff. It's uncomfortable. But now that you know, you're called to play full out, right? Yeah. So everyone in this room now pretty much has gone through these 12 laws, right? And now we know. And in the end, it's all up to us. Now, Sally and I had a conversation yesterday about choice. Now, it isn't choice over the challenge. It's choice on how we interact with it. There's a different space there, right? We're not choosing to not have MS. We're not choosing to not have been sexually abused, right? So the suffering part is how we're interacting with it and how long we choose to swim around in it and wallow and crawl and whine and complain and carry on. It's a very narcissistic place. We don't like to say that. But victimhood is almost more, I almost feel like, because it's a very passive-aggressive underneath space, but just as narcissistic. Every sentence begins with I, and it ends in me. Right? Right? So changing you changes everything, guys. You know, that's all there is to work with. You know, I think that what we get caught in thinking that we can, like we talked about earlier, we get caught in the minutia of what's happening to me, right? And we get caught in that minutia, and we miss the overarching picture that you are me, I am you, right? This is my dream. This is your dream. That's why we walk away with completely different perspectives on any given situation, right? We've collectively chosen to come in this room tonight, right? But we have not collectively chosen what we're going to walk away with. So we're all choosing to interact and be in one great big movie, but we're not choosing our individual. We're not collectively choosing our individual choices, right? It's like you're not choosing my choices, right? It's almost like we're playing an improv. That's probably the closest to it, right? It's like we're in this big improv.